Hi everybody, my name is Isabel Tarling and I'm going to be talking to you about design-based research, something I'm passionate about, a tool that I use very often in all the research that I do. And this specific discussion is about how I've used design-based research as a tool in a bigger research study that has combined socio-cultural research with design-based research, and talking to you about how that connection has happened. The recording is being made specifically for the postgraduate diploma in education technology group that is meeting at UCT at the moment, University of Cape Town. And I'm just saying hi to everyone I know, Cheryl, and hi Nicola, and I don't know who else is there, maybe Shanali is there, so hi Shanali. I hope that what I'm talking about sparks some interest in you and that it gives you some tools to go forward if you're working with design-based research or considering it, and seeing how you can apply it with other thinking tools and other theorists' work in mind. This recording is part of a Google slideshow. So the Peter Dip group, I have shared the slideshow with Nicola and with Cheryl. So please make sure that you are in the slides and that you can carry on working in them. It would be really useful if you make comments. There's a comment button at the top, or you can right click on the slide and make a comment, and the comments will pop up on the side. That will help us going forward. And so if you have any questions or you have any ideas you'd like to share or any comments that you'd like to make, please use the comment feature on the actual slide and it will pop up, and we can see the comments coming up on the right hand side. Also, we're going to be working collaboratively in this Google slide presentation. So when we get to it later on, I'll ask you to start putting in your own ideas on the actual slide. I've made a table for you so you can pick a cell and start working. When we get there, and I have to tell you the story before we start, there's a certain etiquette for working in Google Slides. And basically it boils down to the fact, if you go out for supper and you have salad with your family, everybody doesn't dig into the salad bowl with their hands. Everybody grabs a bowl, dishes out some for them, and uses their own. And that's the same idea here. So if you get to the place where we're going to be working together, pick a cell, work in the cell, and don't go and type on someone else's cell. It gets people quite annoyed. So who am I? I work with teachers very often. I love working with teachers. It's my main research area. Working with teachers from kindergarten right through to high school, right through to grade 12. And I also work with lecturers all over South Africa. And teachers and lecturers very often get to a point where they want to use technology. They don't know necessarily always how to integrate it meaningfully into their teaching and learning. And that's my research focus, is how to integrate technology so it has a maximized impact in classrooms and in assessment. And how do we dip into the potential of technology while we are constrained by situational contexts. So when telecom lines have been stolen and there's no internet at the school, or when we're going through load shedding, as many South Africans very fondly remember, how do we make use of technology in those situations? So that's my research interest, and telling the world about the fantastic work that South African teachers are actually doing at the moment. So design-based research. I love the work of the design-based research group that has developed over the years. In particular, ACCA, for example, ACCA for me is a very strong example of someone who's really fleshed out what design-based research is about. As much as the other great work that has been done with him, but ACCA specifically is relevant to my work because he sees design-based research as a tool that can bridge. So very often in research we find these dichotomies between black and white, and design-based research is for me a means to start seeing the grey in between the black and white, to not just see dichotomies of structure and agency, for example, but to start seeing how between structure and agency there's a lot of grey, and how the grey in between gives meaning to what we understand the world can be and how solutions can develop from that. I also really like the design-based collective, research collectives group work when they say that design-based research is a way that we can use it. We can use it for a methodology. It can be used as a methodology, but it's a way of thinking that helps us to understand why education innovation works, why it doesn't work, and how we can improve on it. But design-based research is not a very, it has in recent years become more pronounced and more clearly defined. But like O'Neill says only last year in the Learning Science Journal, he says, any self-aware learning scientist is insecure about design-based research, but at the same time they remain highly committed to developing it. And the theory behind design-based research tells us all the time that we have to develop it, that we have to work on it, that it's a tool in motion, so to speak. And one of the things that to me is incredibly important with design-based research is that it allows us to use creative approaches to solve human teaching, learning, and performance problems, like Rees, McKinney, and Harrington said. They really capture for me the essence of what research, to me, what makes research powerful is that we can take our creative approaches and we can mix it in and solve human problems, intractable problems that have plagued us for many years, and how we can solve it and understanding the process of how we get there. So I don't know if you've met design-based research. Let's take a playful approach and we say design-based research is the teen in the family. Have you met this teenager before? Have you maybe come across it in other people's work? What were your first impressions? So PG Dip students, if you are on slide 4 right now, I invite you to go and pick a cell. Remember not to mess in someone else's salad. Don't go and write in their cell. So if you see them working on a cell, you'll see their cursor flashing in that cell. Don't go and write in it, go choose another one. And just give us your first impressions as if design-based research was a person. What would your first impressions be? Have you not really met them properly and you wait and see? Do you want to explore the person further? Go in and write down, pick a cell and write down what your first impressions were. Now, and you can stop the recording right now. Right, so we're going to carry on slide 5. So the question was that Nicola and Cheryl asked me to talk to the PG Dip students about is how and why I use design-based research. So this beautiful little picture here on the slide on the left is a picture of some fishing line and nets that have been horribly tangled. You can see some dark blue nets and some light blue nets and some rope, and you can see it's a crow's nest. It really is. And for me, the business of education and the way that we understand education is to me a little bit like this crow's nest here, where everything is so tangled up, and there are some really strong forces that we can see here and there surfacing, like this thick blue line, and in other spaces there are forces that are maybe less pronounced, but they fill up a lot of space, like the light blue netting, but it's a very tangled part of how we understand education and educational research. And what we as researchers do is we want to come and understand this mess that is this crow's nest of rope and nets and string and all sorts of messes in that fish net. As researchers, we want to understand how it got there. We want to understand what caused it to tangle in this particular way. Or, for example, what is it that makes the light blue netting so prolifically filling the space and the dark blue netting only a little bit of the space? We want to really understand what this crow's nest is about. And researchers choose different ways of understanding this crow's nest. If we're in a scientific paradigm, we want to do certain things. If we're in a humanities paradigm, we want to do certain things. If we're in a design paradigm, we do different things. So in a design paradigm, we want to go and find solutions. We want to develop solutions to this crow's nest. How do I untangle it? In a scientific solution, I want to pick one thing and not change anything else, and just pick that one thing and see if I can detangle it from the story and see what happens to the rest of the story, for example. And the humanities thing, I'm going to go and interview everybody that ever touched that rope or the net or used it, you use part of it, and ask them and interview them as to why they chose that net and how did they see this net forming and how did they experience this crow's nest. So these three paradigms is going to give me very different views on what I'm looking at in this crow's nest. And that's why the circle is around the crow's nest, to say I'm looking at this, and depending on the lens that I use to look at this crow's nest is going to depend on what it is that I take away from the picture and from my research journey. So for me, I'm in the business of teaching people to fish. So, and this is why this crow's nest is such an appealing metaphor for me. So I'm in the business of teaching people to fish, teaching educators, teaching teachers, teaching business people how to be creative and innovative in what they do. But how do they use technology to make that creativity and that innovation more visible, to make it to support their creativity and the innovation? Because for me, technology is only a tool. It helps us to get where we want to go, but it doesn't necessarily foster creativity and innovation. We need to foster that in people, and that's how I understand it. So when we foster creativity and innovation in people, technology becomes a tool that drives that. And when I say I'm in the business of teaching people to fish, it's teaching them how to be creative and innovative. So what I do in my research is I want to understand how it is that teachers can become more creative and innovative, and then how does that impact the teaching and learning in the classroom. So, and specifically with emerging technologies. So I've used a social-cultural frame to help me understand the problem. So I've looked at the crow's nest that is teaching and technology, and which is a very intricate crow's nest. If this is probably mild compared to the challenges that we face in this field. So we've got technology being thrown in schools. We've got devices and internet connectivity. We have people with different levels and degrees of comfort working with them, and abilities working with them, capacities, and yet we don't see technology really impacting schooling in a big way. So much like this tangled net, we can't go and fish unless we actually have a net or we have a tool that we can use to go and fish with. And if it's all tangled up and we don't understand how it got to be tangled, we can't go and untangle it and create solutions with it. So the social cultural frame helps me to understand how it got tangled, how the situation that we currently find ourselves in schools came to be. And one of the researchers I really like talking with is, he says to us that we have to understand where teachers are at before we can go and think of changing anything that they do. And the social cultural lens, and specifically that of Pierre Bourdieu, helps me to understand where teachers are at in this crow's nest of teaching, learning, parents, personal relationships, interactions in schools. How does all of that help me to understand where we want to go? And that's what the social cultural lens helps me. So then I put on top of this, now that I understand how the net and the crow's nest and the messiness of this entanglement came about, DBR, or design-based research, helps me to untangle one part of the problem. I don't want to go, and DBR says to me I don't need to go and understand how every little piece fits into the puzzle. I can go and say, I want to tackle this one problem. And how do I tackle this one problem? And how do I create interventions to tackle this one problem and learn from it? That's what DBR does. So going forward, DBR gives me a way to pave the journey so that those who follow after me can learn from what I've done. for example, if I go and untangle the dark blue rope in this crow's nest, instantly someone who comes after me and I write up how I did the untanglement can use a similar process or base their process on mine to go and untangle the beige rope or another piece. So that's what DBR does. It always leaves footprints for those to follow where you've gone. Now, when I started studying design-based research, I really liked the approach. And then it took me some time to get to a point of saying, but what does the design actually mean? Why is there a design focus? What is the design all about? And having worked a lot with design thinking, the design focus in design-based research wasn't as prominent to me as I wanted it to be in different spaces. So, and also because of design thinking and coming from a very strong social cultural background with Pierre Bourdieu's work, I was trying to find a middle way between mixing design and research. And how do I take this research and what makes the two different and why can I put them together was one of my questions. And what helped me to do was to see myself wearing different hats. So when I'm designing, I wear my design hat. And I put on my design hat, and it helps me, for example, when I'm designing to put on different music, completely different music. And the music helps me to think in a very design orientation. When I'm doing analysis, I put on my researcher hat, because then I'm climbing out of the design epistemology of thinking about knowledge in a certain way, and I put my researcher hat on when I do analysis. And it helps me to, I even play different music, just to help me focus on different things of what I want to do differently. So I'm going to discuss both approaches with you. I'm first putting on my designer hat. And when I put my designer hat on, it's a very messy space, and it's a very creative space. And I really enjoy this space. It's one of my my most comfortable zones. So let's talk a little bit more about the design aspect and why I need to have design in design-based research. So, depending on what your research epistemology is just in brackets, epistemology is how you believe knowledge is fundamentally formed and where it's formed and who formed it. So, in design, the epistemology is very different to if I would, for example, be in a scientific space or in a humanities space. In the very strong science-based approaches, they hold a representational view of knowledge. So where in the humanities approach, they see knowledge more as arising between people and how people's interaction shapes the knowledge. So in both those paradigms, knowledge is seen as something that exists, always created between people. Whereas, and it's also to a large degree in both epistemologies, knowledge has also got a little bit of parameters that says that this is the box that this knowledge fits into, and I can teach you this box going forward. And that is why it's so useful to have a socio-cultural lens when I understand how a problem came to be, because that socio-cultural lens says to me it's already existing. I can interview people, I can talk to them, I can listen to them, I can look at what they do, I can understand how they do it from this existing knowledge base. So that's what the scientific or humanities approach is saying to us. It exists already, knowledge exists. In a design epistemology, we see knowledge in a different way. So design says to me that knowledge is emergent. So it arrives, it grows. You have, for example, grounded theory, where knowledge emerges from what we do. And design sees knowledge as developed by individuals to create abstractions of what could be, of systems that have not yet existed. So Sloan talks a lot about that in 2006 work. So very, very strong difference between humanities and science-based epistemologies and the design epistemology. And that foundation sets you off in different ways on how to solve what the problem is that you want to solve. So looking from this perspective, we say that knowledge is speculative and exploratory and it's incomplete. We approach intractable problems in different ways. If I approach an intractable problem from a humanities or a scientific approach, I'm going to do it very differently than if I approach it from a design approach. So a design approach will say to me that I am future orientated. I imagine and develop solutions. I don't just go and take a current solution and change parts of it and see how it impacts the rest of it. I very much have a new approach or an original or fresh approach where I want to say, how can I use what I have in a very different way? So design is also very, very pragmatic, creative, and innovative. So I don't know if you often think about things like this, but for me, to wonder about how it is that we get to think of the unthought, of things that we can't or haven't yet thought about. How do we create those thoughts? Which is a very, very philosophical avenue. But design says to us that we can and we are encouraged to create the unthought constructs or frameworks or categories and put things into different perspectives to solve problems in ways that we could never have imagined without design. So design itself also has to be recognized as not something that you have an end product of, but that it is a process of learning. So design doesn't just arrive and you have a solution and you implement the solution. The process of how you arrived at the solution, how you implement it, what you do with it, and then what you learn from your failures and your mistakes and what you learn from your successes, that is the whole part of that is part of the learning process. And how is design different? And I think I have spoken quite a bit about this, but just to recap, it's a theory testing paradigm. In theory testing paradigms, we use design and research as distinct processes. With DBR, design and research is seen as a valid approach in itself, and it eliminates the boundaries between design and research. So while I'm saying I have different hats, like Eagleson said, it eliminates the boundaries. While I have a researcher hat or a design hat, we start taking those boundaries away. In essence, I'm the same person. I just wear different hats at different parts of my journey. So what I would like you to do is, if you're in the Future Dip group now, go back to the Google slide and just go and reflect for me. And unfortunately, I think maybe my photo has gone, or my screenshot has gone over the question here. The question is, why is it necessary to include a design focus? When we're doing design-based research, why is it necessary to include a design focus? Go pick a cell and go and just reflect on it. There are no right and wrongs. This is a judgment-free space. So if you want to type in all caps or all lower cases and make spelling mistakes, go for it. It's not about the grammar or the spelling. It's all about the message. So just go and reflect for me why it's necessary to include a design focus at this early point in this discussion. I'm going to stop now and just give you some time to go and insert your comments. Thank you very much. And thank you for finishing those comments. So for me, design-based research has three very strong key aspects. Of course, there are going to be many more, and different people will dispute these aspects, and that's absolutely fine. But in my understanding of design-based research, the three aspects that are most important is that it is very strong theory-based, it's all about the learning, and it is iterative. So if we go and think about the theory, other than other ideas, and this is where you might start asking, but hang on a minute, you said the epistemology was about knowledge was that it's emergent and it's speculative and exploratory, and that's completely, absolutely right. But design-based research very strongly draws its future orientation by being grounded very strongly in theory. So as you can imagine, a plant can grow and prosper and grow in all sorts of wonderful ways if its roots are strongly anchored. And this is what design-based research does, and that's why I use the image of the plant to say that this plant can grow into the most magnificent big tree, granted that its roots are firmly grounded in the ground, in solid foundation. And that's what design-based research does, is it drives itself deep into the ground of theory, and it shoots anchors deep into it. So if you're going to do design-based research, you have to have a very, very strong theoretical foundation where your roots are deeply sunk into, because that will determine a lot of how you grow and go forward, and that you don't become this endless drifter, but that you know very certainly where you are going, because your theory is what forms the foundation of your thinking. So, for example, in my specific instance, my theory of socio-cultural research and understanding why teachers are hesitant sometimes to use technology, what drives their choices to use technology in certain ways and not in others, what drives their choices to choose not to use technologies in their classrooms, how do I impact those choices? These are all driven for me, very strongly by Pierre Bourdieu's work on habitus and field, and understanding that teachers are inherently influenced by their habitus, but their habitus influences how they understand the world and how the world around them is conceptualized. So that's how my theory, my design-based research is deeply grounded in theory. But then also, design-based research, the aim of it is to produce theory as an outcome of the process. So you're not just going to go and do design-based research to see a solution, but you're building on the theory that has already been made. So your research findings and your formative evaluation are going to become your design principles, which form the theory going forward. The second key aspect for me of DBR is its very strong emphasis on learning, and learning in different spaces and learning by different people. So learning takes place in between participants, it takes place in different contexts, it takes place in different spaces, in and out of school. I specifically chose this image here of a little school building on Saturn to help you conceptualize that learning doesn't need to be within the four walls of a classroom. It doesn't need to be guided by a knowledgeable adult that guides where the learning takes place, or who does it, or what tools to use. So with design-based research's emphasis on learning, it asks us, when we design different elements, what happens with those elements in the learning process, and how do they impact different people and different processes when these elements are put in place. So Collins, and I know that's why I said to you earlier that design-based research is, we can't say that it's only a late 90s, early 2000s thing. So there's lots of researchers who already laid the foundation for how it was formed before the late 90s even arrived. So Collins, for example, said, how do different designs for learning contribute to learning, collaboration, motivation, etc.? And that's what the design-based researcher wants to do, is to say, when I go and impact these different factors, how does it impact the learning that happens? Very strong focus on learning. But design-based research interventions are also very iterative in their design. So and we're going to get to that now. We go through this cycle. We design, we implement, we analyze, we refine. Then we go through the next cycle. From the refinement, we redesign, we re-implement, reanalyze, and we re-refine based on our analysis. And then we redesign, and so the process carries on. Very iterative process. But also, the interventions always, without doubt, takes place within natural test-bed context. That means we don't work in a lab. We work in real-life context where teachers and learners are working in collaboration at the same time, or where lecturers are in their classes working, or where practitioners are implementing what they want to do. Very much real-world context. The intervention is also solution. It's also very much emergent, and the way that we develop a solution is saying to us we're responsible for changing different things in the model or whatever it is that we're using, but we're not saying that we have, in a scientific approach, for example, we will want to change one element and see what impact this change has on all the others. Design-based research, remember I said it's speculative, it's exploratory, it departs from a point where it says, I can't know everything that happens. I can't see the impact that my changes will have on every possible factor. So I'm not going to try and identify every factor that could possibly change. But I'm going to go and change different elements in the learning space and see what happens. Also, design-based research interventions are very participatory, and where possible, you're going to walk this journey with practitioners. Harrington says to us that it's great to walk it with practitioners, but where the context of your research doesn't allow it to, you don't need to make it a participatory model where your participants are going to help you decide on the process, on the solutions, on every step of the way. You can also take an activity where, very similar to, for example, action research, you go and you work with practitioners to change their own practice. Design-based research can also make use of those kind of tools. So now that we've spoken about the three key elements, think about these three key elements, postgraduate diploma students. Think about the three elements that you've come across. Think about them, try and picture them as personality traits of design-based research. Which one of those did you immediately like? If it's all three, write them down. Which of the personality traits, these three key aspects of design-based research, or even something else that I might not have mentioned, stand out for you about it at this point? I'm going to just stop there for a second and give you a chance to fill in your initial ideas of the elements of design-based research that you like most at the moment. Thank you very much for your comments, PGDIP students. It's always refreshing to see how you think about things. So I'm going to talk in the next few slides very much about the process that I went through in my design-based research. So we've spoken about what it is, we've spoken about the key elements thereof. Now I'm going to talk about the process of design-based research. So this little diagram, it's just my very fundamental drawing skills coming to the fore, showing you how I understand how design-based research works. So when I have an intractable problem, or for example, it's also called a wicked problem, a problem that has plagued humanity for a long time, or plagued certain aspects of, for example, education, something that has been really bugging us and we really want to solve it. That's called my global problem. Obviously, a researcher at our level or at your level, we're not going to be able to solve the world's problem, but we're going to take one aspect of it and we're going to address it and see if we can find solutions for that problem. And what we'll do is we'll start with identifying the global problem here at the red square, and then we take this global problem and we imagine with what Einstein used to call thought experiments. We use thought experiments and we imagine different ways of how we can possibly address this problem. Once we've diverged and imagined a whole lot of possible solutions, we choose the solution we want to try, we implement it, we analyze it, and then we analyze the implementation, we refine our design, and we go to the next step. And those are the two orange squares that say to us, once I've got my global intervention, I've implemented the first time, I've learned from my mistake, I've learned how not to do it, I go and implement it again. I re-implement it, I learn from my mistakes, I analyze the process, and I re-implement it again. And so the process goes on and on and on until I get to a place where I've learned so much and that the process is so refined that if I carry on, I'm going to get the same, I can predict that I would probably get the same results over and over. And we call those completely elaborated intervention designs. So that's the process that we go through. The end product is always design principle. So a design-based research study is always going to work towards developing theory, and we call that theory design principles. Design principles will talk about the process, how if you want to achieve X, what process are you going to implement. It's going to talk about if you have this problem that you want to solve, and you want to solve this aspect of the problem, these are solutions that I use and that you could possibly use as well. And also it's going to talk about in this space where this problem is existing at this point in time, how can I understand the problem? All of that comes down to design principles. So in this process, I'm going to flesh out each one for you a little bit more. I'm going to take the 4 key aspects in each iteration cycle: the design, implementation, evaluation, and analysis. And I'm just going to explain to you how I used it in my own research. So first I started off by identifying the global research problem. And this was way back in 2014. My research problem was that while technologies are available in schools, while access is increasingly being brought about by the e-learning game changer in the Western Cape, we're not seeing a significant change in how teachers are using technologies and how they're teaching with it. So I understood this problem to be a global problem because a lot of people, Zhao and Siko, a lot of people around the world, they talk about this problem and say the teachers around the world, no matter the grade they're teaching, no matter the subject they're teaching, they tend to use technologies in ways that don't really exploit the full potential of emerging technologies and what it could do in classrooms. So then I took a step of remember I said to you, we've got to plant our roots very, very deeply in theory. So I went to analyze the problem. I spoke to practitioners, I spoke to people that have worked in, for example, the Kanye project that was before the current e-learning game changer project was on board. The Kanye project wanted to put computers into schools and they built labs, etc., etc. So all the Kanye project did was it laid a foundation for where the e-learning game changer took over in about 2011, 2012. So I went and understood the problem from the practitioners, being the teachers, and also from the previous rollout. I went and spoke to those people. I also I asked a lot of them, what were your main challenges? What are your main concerns at the moment with technology in classrooms? I also looked at different researchers in the field in South Africa and abroad. What have they done with similar problems? So I went into a very extensive literature review. And this helped me to narrow my focus. So I've looked at this incredibly broad spectrum of problems and challenges and concerns, both from literature and from practitioners. And then I went and I narrowed my focus. And I said, what is it that's my absolute my problem for this study? Because you can't tackle the whole world at once. You need to go and tackle it one little thread at a time. And remember that crow's nest, if we start trying to undo the whole crow's nest, we'll end up more frustrated than anything else. So I narrowed my question to say, Zhao and Siko say to us that teachers' pedagogy informs how they choose to use technology. So my questions were all around, how do I impact their pedagogy? Is it possible to even change teachers' pedagogy? And how do I understand that change process? And then once I've understood that, then I went and I put my design hat on, and I then went and started thinking about solutions to how I could do that. This is what in design thinking is called divergence. And with divergence, once you've identified your research problem, the problem you want to tackle, divergence says to you, you go and write down as many possible solutions. You talk to everybody that comes along your way. You talk to the waiter at the Spur. You talk to your buddies, your friends, your family, everybody who has a possible solution about your problem. You talk to the practitioners that you work with. I spoke to teachers, I spoke to the Kenya people, I spoke to the people at the WCD, the Western Cape Education Department, everybody who would possibly have insight into how solutions could possibly be made to address the problem I was identifying. And it doesn't really matter when you diverge if the solution is viable or not. The idea is that you write everything down. You write every possible solution down. Then you go into what we call a convergence phase, where you go and examine every solution that was brought forward. So now you go and pull out your serviette that you wrote hastily at the spur when you're having a conversation with your friends, or you pull out your voice note that you made on your phone, or your scribbled notes in the back of your textbook. You put all your solutions on the table, and you examine each one, and you ask yourself, how effectively can this actually work? How can this solution actually be made and implemented in my different test bed situations? Perhaps I need to modify some. Perhaps some are more viable than others. You examine everyone and you come up with a shortlist. So you're shortlisting your candidates. And you develop a list that is most applicable to your context, to what's going to potentially work in your context. And then you start developing solutions based on that, or you start developing creative ways of achieving that solution, or one or two or three solutions that you want to try out. This takes us into our second phase. So now we've developed our solution, we've developed our first idea of how we can possibly implement it. Now I start to take a back seat. I put my solution on hold, and I go and think about what's going to happen when I implement this. You take what Einstein says is you take your thought experiment and you walk through how the implementation is going to happen. Who will be involved? Who will not be involved? Who will you need to get permission from? And you need to go and think about everything in this space. You need to try and map out every single space of who's there, how will they be doing it, what will they be doing, how will this impact what they're doing, etc. You need to go and get permission from the right people. If you're studying at the University of Cape Town, you need to get ethical clearance to do your research. If you want to walk into a Western Cape Education Department school, you need to get permission from Dr. Weinhardt. And she's really wonderful. So you're going to have to go and send your proposal and your ethical clearance from the university to her, and she will give you permission. That is official permission. That doesn't mean you have permission from the school principal or from the HOD or from the manager, the line manager where you're working. That doesn't mean you have their permission. And once you have Dr. Weinhardt's permission, you go to the principal or the line manager or whoever is the person that you're going to report to, and you ask them very, very nicely, you've got Dr. Weinhardt's permission, would they give you permission to do research in their school or in their institution? Once you've got their permission, now you need to get written consent. So if you're going to do research with learners, you need to get their written consent and that of their parents. If you're wanting to use their artifacts, their research artifacts or anything that's created, photos or anything, you need to get permission from the parents and from the learners or from the students. If you want to do research with teachers, you need to get their permission in writing so that you have it to fall back on if they give you permission to use their work. And in this space, typically we promise anonymity. So we show them how we will make sure that every time we use the artifacts or the data from the interviews, that we're going to show them how we can anonymize it so that their name and their geographic location is never made public. Then you walk through the process and you imagine yourself arriving at the school or at your research site, and you imagine from the minute that you walk out the car, every step of the way. And if you have to close your eyes and you imagine it with a voice note, you do that. If you have to draw a map, like the little purple one I drew at the top, you draw a map and you show yourself every step of the way what you need at every space. You also need to think about in that journey, when you think about it, is how are you going to collect evidence? when we do design, we need to collect evidence in the design process, in the implementation process. We need to document everything that we do. We need to document how we do it, because we're going to use that as reflective material going forward. So, for example, in my research, I've taken hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos. I've used concept maps where my participants go through a very structured process to draw concept maps. That becomes part of my research artifact. My participants go and do reflective surveys. After the first day, for example, in groups, they do reflections, but they also do online reflections where they write about their ideas and whatnot. And where possible, try and capture as much evidence online as you can. So let me tell you what happened was, I had my participants in one of my research sites had created a tool, and we couldn't get it to share. No matter what we did, we could not get this tool to share. But I had taken so many photos of it, of them creating it, that I had evidence that I actually had created it and what they had done with it. And I had evidence of their feedback when they spoke about how they could use the tool pedagogically in an online forum. I used Edmodo. So instantly I had evidence of what we had done and how teachers had thought they'd used it. The tool in your pocket, that little cell phone, is a wonderful, wonderful tool. In the past, we would have to use a camera and we'd have to use notes. We've got our cell phones. Make short video clips, make photographic journeys, but capture as much as you can during implementation. Then we go to the evaluation phase. So now that I've implemented my solution, I've collected all oodles and hoops of data about how it went. Now I go to a space where we start formatively evaluating what happens. And evaluation helps us to reflect on the learning that's taking place. Because remember, you are learning as much as your participants might be learning. And you need to capture that learning to help you to reflect on it and build theory. Because that learning is what makes the design-based research so powerful. So if you can, develop different solutions or different ways of evaluating what your participants have done. And your participants can be part of this evaluation. They can evaluate your process. How did the process work for them? They can evaluate the solution. How did the solution work for them? They can evaluate what they want to achieve, and did they achieve it? Did the solution address what they wanted to achieve? Did the solution help them go forward? So they can be part of the evaluation of the implementation. And also you can have, so for example, I use Google Forms extensively in my evaluation. So I have a Google form. After every time that I implement my process, I go and evaluate the process according to the participants, how they experienced it, according to the process, of how the solution was implemented, but also I also evaluate the solution itself and what the solution has done and how effective it was. And that's what I've tried to capture on this slide. So that evaluation I do very soon, a day or two after the implementation, if not on the last day. And I can also involve my participants in this process. So up to this point, I've used my design hat very strongly. In the last step 3, reformative evaluation, my design hat has started slipping off a little bit, and my researcher hat has started coming closer. When I get to step 4, this is where I formally take off my research hat, I put it aside and I put on my design hat, put it aside and I put on my researcher hat. Because I have to make an epistemological break at this point, where I no longer just evaluate, but I'm now going into a very formalized process of analysis. And you can use formative analysis, which is analysis that runs parallel to your process, but you can also use summative, where you go and at the end of your process go and evaluate the whole jolly lot, the full ambit of what you've done. I wouldn't recommend that because, as you can see, design-based research creates enormous amounts of data. So I would strongly recommend that you evaluate in the process, that you analyze in the process. So in my fourth step, my analysis phase, I now have my research hat very strongly on. I've taken my emergent view of knowledge, where I see knowledge as a designer that is exploratory and speculative, and I've taken that designer hat and I've put it aside. It is standing on my desk where I can't see it, and I now have my researcher hat on. I've changed music, I changed whatever I'm doing, just to refocus on what it is that I'm wanting to achieve with my analysis. Now in my analysis phase, I take a step back and I look at my evaluation, and it helps me to take a week or two between when I've gathered my evaluation, when I've done it, and when I actually go and sit down and do my analysis. It helps me to do the transcripts, for example, where I'm writing down everything about that I recorded, my voice notes, where I'm writing down the interviews I've had, where all these tools of being a researcher is now coming to create distance between myself as my research space and between myself as my analysis space. So when I'm analyzing, I'm asking myself, am I qualitatively or quantitatively analyzing what I'm wanting to do? If I have loads of forms that were filled in, if I have survey data and data where people just use multiple choice answers, obviously I can then come and do quantitative analysis. And I can do statistical analysis with the data that I have. But very often the data that I get in is very qualitative in nature, and I'm going to do qualitative analysis. It depends on what is best suited for you. So in my space, I had both. I had my concept maps, which I qualitatively and quantitatively analyzed. I had my interview data, which I could do the same with, but my interview data was very much more qualitative analysis. And then also I had my reflective data, and then I had my surveys and my reflective sheets that my participants filled in, which was more quantitative in nature. So what I did was, when on point 3 I say analyze your formative evaluation data. This is going to help you to create distance between yourself and the process of the design, so that you're not a practitioner reporting on what you're doing, but you're actually analyzing your data. So I took my evaluation data. After I've done all my interview transcripts and all that, I went and I took my evaluation data and I went and analyzed that. So that what I did was I went and I identified from all the evaluations, from all the interview transcripts and the reflections, I went and identified what we call emergent codes. So I would read through it and I would start coding, and I would identify how people frame information technology. Do they frame it in this way and not that way? Do they frame it as time, or do they frame it in terms of space, or do they frame it in terms of what it can do as a verb? I would start using those emergent codes that came through, and I read over and over and over. It is every transcript, every concept map, everything that came in. Once I had the emergent codes, I went and I read the code, and I started seeing how the code started building up into a bigger code, or more meta code that I could start seeing. Also, I used a tool called Word Clouds with an S.com to take my codes, or to take my data and to visualize it. Because for me, Silverman says that we can analyze what we can see. And when I see data in a visual format, I can analyze it easier. It just works better for me. So I used that. I also used the graphs in Google Sheets. They work really, really well to start visualizing the data and to start identifying questions that come from my data, so that I can analyze it in more depth. And then I start seeing preliminary design principles that come forward. If I wanted to change what teachers were doing, what could I say would help to change it? What design of the process would help? What design itself? What solution solutions help to help teachers to change. And then also, it's very, very important for you to keep a diary of your analysis. Write it somewhere. For me, what I did, I don't like written. My hand gets too sore to write for hours. So I keep an analysis diary on Google Slides. And every time I work on my analysis, I have a different slide that I add in as I need. So it's very important that you document and reflect on your analysis in the process of doing it. Because coming back afterwards, we want to paint this picture of all moonshine and roses because our analysis was so seamlessly. But when we write down the questions and the trouble and the issues that we come up against, we instantly are creating a way for ourselves to reflect on the analysis process and to create even further layers between what happened in the process and now the analysis that's taking place. From this analysis of the first iteration, I go and I take my design principles and they guide how I'm going to go forward. So they're going to say to me, this worked, this didn't work. Why did this work? How did this work really well? How can I make more of what worked and how can I make less of what didn't work? And that leads me to the redesign of the iteration. So I'm going to take my solution, I'm going to redesign it, and then I'm going to start the whole process again of implementation, evaluation, analysis, redesign. This leads me to the end. So now if you can imagine you've gone through your iterations 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 times and you get to a place where your design principles are not really being refined anymore. You can see that if I do another iteration, I'm basically going to stay with the same design principles for affecting my problem. So my problem is I want to change how teachers are using technology. After my second or third iterations, I can already start seeing that my design principles stay very similar. They change after the third one almost completely. They stay the same. So now I know that I'm getting to a point where my design principles are more or fully elaborated. We can't ever say that the design process is finished. So we can't say that it's complete, because if you take the same process that I have worked with and you go and implement the same process, you might find very different things from what I did. Or the teachers themselves would, and ideally, this is the ideal, they would continue the change process. So I don't want to say that it's completed or that it's finished. I want to see it as fully running through the process and continuing. And once my design principles are fully elaborated, then I know I've got to a point where I can start stopping or thinking of stopping. So when I've done that, when my iterations are finished, I do what we call retrospective analysis, where I now take all my research findings, I've taken all my iterations, all my evaluations, all my analyses, my parallel analyses, and I now start looking at trying to understand the big picture. As you can see, I've kept a diary, or like I suggested to you, keep a diary of where you're going in your analysis process. But this is the point where you now start saying, how do I see the big picture? How do I start thinking about design principles for affecting change to my particular problem? So my problem is teaching change and how to change teachers' pedagogies to use technologies in different ways. So when I get to a point where my design principles are fully elaborated, I've stopped my iteration, I do my retrospective analysis, then I want to go and say, when I analyze the overall process, which themes and codes emerge from the overall process, and how can I interpret these themes and codes, and how can I visualize them? And please don't forget to record your analysis. Please, you have to write it down. Then only do you start getting to a point where you start writing down your analysis, and you write up what the analysis process has been, what you've found, with your analyst hat on. Look at your analysis through your analyst hat and reanalyze your own analysis through your analyst hat. And then you go and talk about, when you analyze your DBR and analysis process, what what was it that worked in your analysis, what didn't work, how did it work, what was more effective than others. And this frames how your analysis section in your work is going. A very, very good Urban Freifel, I think that's how you pronounce it. He developed this image of design-based research, which I find extremely useful to help us see how design principles inform the development of theory. So you can see here, just like that plant I'm saying to you, that's rooted, deeply rooted in theory. Your theory informs the initial design. The requirements are coming from our participants of our problem analysis, and this leads to our first global design. Once I have implemented it, I've evaluated, I've analyzed it, I start finding that I can see implications for theory, which is my design principle. But I also see my analysis as refining the design of the next iteration. The next iteration gets done, implemented, and analyzed, and now I have more. And you can see the line becomes stronger implications for theory. And so, as Freifel says, shows the process continues forward. Now, I want to take a little break here in wrapping up. Think of design-based research as that teenager that you've now gotten to know a little bit better. You've seen him through my eyes. You've met him through my understanding of this process. And go and write down for me, because whenever we meet someone, we always have a question or something sitting uncomfortably. What is it that you find that is just slightly uncomfortable, or that's raised an eyebrow, or that makes you think, I'm not too sure about that one? Can you add your questions on here? And then on the next slide, I want you to go and reflect on, do you see yourself becoming a friend for life with design-based research, or do you just see it as a casual fling, something that you could use once off and not use again? Or do you see it as it's not your type at all, not something for you? Again, this is a no judgment space. You can write down anything you wish. It's anonymous, so we won't know who's written what. Just go and fill in these 2 slides for me, please. I'm going to give you some time to do that. And in closing, I would like to thank very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening so attentively and for taking such great care in your answers. Thank you for sharing this presentation with me. I've really enjoyed it to talk about my strategies and talk about how I enjoy design-based research. And you can look out, there's a paper coming up on it very soon. If you have any questions, please remember to use the comment feature and post the questions for me. If you would like to follow what I have to say, I often sprout a few odds and ends about education and technology on Twitter. I'm just under Isabel Tarling. Or you can go and look me up on Facebook under Isabel Tarling. Or obviously, if you'd like to ask further questions about design-based research, please feel free to email me at isabel@tarling.co.za. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, everybody.